Nathan, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us about your new film, which I believe just was released yesterday, The Baby in the Basket. I got a chance to watch it early, and yeah, I appreciate taking the time to talk about it because I was very interested to hear your thoughts on the making of this film.
Yeah, no problem at all. And thanks for covering it.
You bet, you bet. Now, if you wouldn't mind, before we get into it, I always like to ask the director if you wouldn't mind giving a short synopsis of what The Baby in the Basket is about to my listeners.
Yeah, sure. So it's 1944, near the end of the Second World War, and the location is a convent on a remote Scottish island. And one night during a storm, a cloaked figure leaves a baby in the basket on the steps of the convent, and the nuns take it in to care for it. One of the nuns then starts to suspect that the child is actually the spawn of the devil, and the other nuns lock her up for her own well-being, believing her to be driven mad by the isolation. And then all this weird stuff starts happening, and they all begin to question their faith and wonder if it's actually if our thoughts were actually true.
Yeah, this film, I went in a bit cold, and I'm glad I did because it was pretty impressive where you take this story from where you started. Now, I guess the first one is what made you want to set it in 1944, during World War II, because I thought that was an interesting choice with this story.
Well, I'd actually kind of come up with the story idea, and I'd said to Tom, the writer, I was like, "Look, I've got this idea." Tom really liked it, and we had discussed setting it in the present. And I think Immaculate is maybe set in the present, although you don't see too many sort of artifacts from this era. Um, and I thought I was like, it would get rid of mobile phones, signals and all this modern stuff that they would probably just rely on to get themselves out of the situation. And so I'd said to Tom, I was like, look, do we maybe set it in the 50s or the 60s or something? And Tom had actually come up with the idea of setting it during the sort of latter days of the Second World War. And he said he thought it would be an interesting juxtaposition if all this kind of mayhem's going on in the UK and around the world, but these nuns are isolated in this convent, so they know the stuff is kind of going on, but that outside world doesn't necessarily affect their day to day. And he's like, I thought that would be a nice kind of, and then obviously you can kind of draw on the PTSD thing,
Yeah.
and have some war references in there. So it just kind of made sense to do that.
Yeah, I always like period horror pieces. I don't think we get enough of them because, as you said, you end up running into that. Well, why didn't they just make a phone call? It's like
Yeah.
you have the phone in your hand. Why don't you just, so many. I don't have a signal now. Doesn't quite,
Yeah.
sell anymore either. So,
No.
um, and you're dealing with the religious aspect of it when you're writing this, because this is a more mature subject. I was surprised to see, the differences in each of the nun characters, which I appreciate. The sisters each had their own personality and their own vice or hang up or whatnot. But you're dealing with the subject of religion can always be touchy. How did you approach that? Was it one of those where maybe we can't do that, or did you just go ahead and write these characters the way you wanted them to, and not worrying too much how many feathers you might ruffle?
I mean, I think for us, the film was about. I mean, my English teacher told me there's only one real story ever, which is good versus evil. And you can translate that to action movies or even dramas or anything. And so for us, it was a kind of good versus evil thing. It was about people questioning their faith, which I'm sure happens in any religion at any one time. So, we weren't too concerned about. We knew that there might be sort of polarizing views in terms of the content in there because some of it is a little bit risque. But in the age of Saltburn and whatnot, we just kind of thought let's just go for it. I mean, I know that some people have referred to it as nunsploitation, and it kind of starts out as Black Narcissus and then kind of becomes a bit nunsploitation towards the end, which I think is fair to say. But I mean, the stuff that we put in there, we didn't want to put in there for no reason.
Right.
So, for example, I know that you mentioned all the nuns are kind of different and have got their own quirks. And actually, whether people pick up on this or not, Tom, the writer, had actually given each character one of the deadly sins.
Hmm.
So, for example, my character's lust.
Yeah.
A young guy in a convent mind's lust. Um, for example, Mother Superior's is envy
Hmm.
because she's envious that she's envious of youth, of the freedom and
Right.
promiscuity that some people have, and she's envious of people who have had children because she'd always wanted to become a mother. So each of them have kind of got their own seven deadly sin, which the evil in the film kind of uses to draw them in
Right.
and makes them question their faith. Whether or not casual viewers pick up on that, whether it's something people might pick up on the second or third time, if anyone watches this more than once. But yeah,
Well, I hope they do because there's a lot of stuff going on, but I really like that each character was different. And now that you're mentioning the sins, yeah, I can see it because you have the one character who has her vice of Eleanor has the vice of I think alcoholism. So there's your gluttony right there,
yeah.
involved. And yeah, I could see that with each character being the sins, and it plays into the devil baby angle, whether or not it's a devil baby or not, which we
Yeah.
don't want to spoil too much with it. But yeah, and this convent you picked, the location is its own character. I loved this where you shot this. Did you shoot it in a couple different locations, or was it all at the same church?
So the exterior of the convent that you see is the same as the interior, so that's the same building. So the sort of sanctuary of the church, so to speak,
Sure.
is all the same building, and the basement was there, and the sort of the chancel and kind of anything where they're walking down these Gothic corridors. All of the living quarters and whatnot were shot at two different museums.
Mm.
So the convent's actually a place called St. Conan's Kirk, and we were originally going to go with something a little bit more modest, and kind of smaller, because typically that's probably what it would have been, instead of something grand like that. But we thought, a bit of creative license. You want it to look good on screen. It was a friend that had suggested St. Conan's Kirk when we were looking for a location, and I googled it and I hadn't seen it before, and I was like, "Wow, that looks spectacular!" And it was right next to the water as well. And I didn't think that we would get it, but it's open as a tourist attraction during the day,
Mm.
but at night, obviously most of our film is set at night.
Right.
So what we were doing was, as soon as it closed as a tourist attraction, we would grab the last couple of hours of daylight to shoot the daytime scenes and then shoot all night. So it worked out quite well.
Oh, that's good that it worked well. Yeah, because it's visually stunning. I mean, the inside of that church was gorgeous, and I loved the character of it as well. It had that feel of where these nuns would be living. Uh, so,
Yeah.
and so, how much of a challenge is that for you now? I know you do a lot of acting as well as directing, but how big of a challenge is that to do both front and behind the camera for you?
I think you almost have to switch quite quickly from looking at the shot on the monitor to running around and standing on your mark. I mean, it is obviously when you're doing scenes with where you're not in them, you're looking and you can fully concentrate on that. But Andy Crane, the DOP, kind of co-directed this, so he's very good at he's very good visually lining up the shots. We'll bounce ideas off each other, and then if I'm suddenly on autopilot or he thinks that something else could be improved acting wise, then he'll chip in as well, which is great. So I guess really the whole directing thing for me was born out of I want to put my kind of creative stamp on it, but also I did a few short films where other people had directed them, and I thought I would quite like a go at this. I feel like I could maybe do it better or
Sure.
whatever. So it's and I think that it makes sense if you almost have kind of creative continuity in a way, as well.
Well, and also you had input in writing this, so I imagine you know the story you're very familiar with it and how you're picturing you want this to play out versus trying to explain it to someone else. So yeah, that you do get that creative flow in here, and yeah, I just the visual style of this as well. You do a number of night shots which looked great. There's one in particular where I think it's your character happens to catch a nun out in in the moonlight,
Yeah.
uh, uh, and doing the night shots. How much of a challenge was that for it? Because sometimes I see people use day to night, which you can kind of tell, and other times they're shooting it at night and it's just too dark. So how did you go about to capture those night shots? Because they looked gorgeous.
Oh, thanks. No, that's good to hear. I guess I don't really like the whole day for night thing. I never think that it looks quite right. In fact, actually, it's almost easier to do the other way about because lights these days, they've got really good daylight settings on them. If you do encroach too much on the nighttime when you're trying to shoot day scenes, the light coming through the window sometimes looks exactly like the sun. So it's actually easier to do it the other way about. Obviously, as long as you don't see outside into the
Right.
sky. But the nighttime scenes, yeah, I mean, we could run power from the convent, obviously, but really your only source of light outside somewhere like that is the moonlight. But we decided that we're going to light up the different windows of the convent as well. So, I think that turned out all right. I suppose. Lighting big areas like that and lighting them at night can be quite challenging, and obviously you're lighting such a large area, even the windows in the convent, so you're doing more running around than usual. But yeah, given what we had to work with, hopefully it looks quite nice.
Yeah, it gave it a unique look, but the nighttime scenes, I always like them when they feel like they're night, yet you can see what's all going on. And I know that's a difficult balance for some folks, especially. And your cast of characters you have are an interesting sort. How did you assemble this cast? Was it a group of people you worked with before? Did you do a lot of searching? Because there's a lot of talent here and a wide range of, it seems, experience too with the talent that you have.
Yeah, so Michaela and Elle, who play Eleanor and Valerie, I'd worked with them before in another film called When Darkness Falls, which was a sort of slow burn mystery thriller type thing that Tom also wrote. So we knew that we wanted to get those guys back in. Amber, we never worked with before, who plays Agnes. She just been in Winnie the Pooh and was kind of had a bit of a profile, and so we thought it'd be nice to work with someone new. And she put in a really great performance in the film. I've worked with myself a few times before, so that was an easy one. Um, and then we've got Lisa who plays Lucy. That I think Tom had made contact with, and she had come over. And then the rest of them, we went out to Marion DeBow, who is the Bond girl in The Living Daylights, and then you've got Paul Barber, who's known for The Full Monty and Only Fools and Horses, and then Annabelle Lanyon. And I think Tom knew of or had contacted Annabelle before. So really for them, it was just a case of reaching out to the agents to see if they would be interested in doing it, because we thought it might be quite nice to get some relatively familiar British faces
Sure,
in there that had a bit of a classic back catalogue,
sure.
and yeah, just to give it a bit of weight. And they really do. They all bring this sort of gravitas to the film.
Yeah, I thought they did. Annabelle. Yeah, I liked them all. Paul, especially. I loved Paul's character. Getting to work with him, I imagine, had to be. It seemed like it was fun. At least you two seemed to get along on camera. Your two characters got along just fine. But yeah, everybody seemed to be in on it and work well with each other, even though you have different experiences going on in this, especially with the subject matter, because I imagine this could, someone's reading this and going, wait, you're going to do what? Where now?
Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, that was obviously. I think that people have to kind of read it, and you know. if people read it and thought, okay, I see what they're trying to do with this, and not kind of go for cheap, or just shock value for the sake of it. I think that that there were reasons kind of linked for people's behavior in it, as
Mhm.
opposed to just throwing random nudity and whatnot in there. But yeah, Tom's got this habit of writing really risky scenes for me in the hope that he's going to call my bluff one day and catch me out, and I'll go, there's no way I'm doing that, but I haven't yet. I'm not going to give in and let him win. So goodness knows what you'll see me doing in the next film.
Yeah, you see it in this one, and you look at a confession booth, not quite the same way again, maybe, but or uh, but yeah, no, I mean, I like the risks you take, but one of the interesting feelings for it is this film could easily lean into too campy or too offensive. And while it is taking place in a religious site, a religious setting involving religion, it felt like you were still trying to maintain a respect level, like not make it this too offensive or whatnot. Is that kind of what you were trying to go for? Because it felt like while these events are happening here, it didn't feel like you were trying to make a statement about religion necessarily as much as just telling the story of, well, what happens if nuns get a demon baby? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we weren't trying. It wasn't, a statement film. We weren't trying to make a statement, like you say. I think that, as I say, anyone can kind of have a question of faith, and it wasn't like an anti-religious sentiment or anything like that. It was just, I suppose, a sort of, character study of people,
Right.
and it didn't necessarily have to be a demon baby. That could have existed solely on its own as a drama between the characters and their crisis of faith. But I guess it was kind of just meant to show that humans always have internal conflict, and it's
Mhm.
about either rising above that or succumbing to it. But it wasn't an atheist message or anything like that.
Well, yeah, the nuns, the you humanize the nuns, because I think there's this image sometimes of nuns being a particular way and not actually being people. And here you have them being people. I mean, they're having normal conversations. They have their own vices, like you said, questions of faith and such. Especially with the Agnes character, who seems to be most in tune with, yeah, this baby isn't right. Uh, which, speaking of the baby, you have, and mad props to you, sir, and your team for using practical effects. Thank you. You have, you have some pretty impressive practical effects, but how much time and planning did you do for those? Because you don't have it excessive amount, but where you do have it, it's done very well.
I think that the baby thing is probably one of our slight bugbears about the film. I mean, we'd kind of gone down various different avenues of thinking. Do we try and put some CGI embellishments on an actual baby? So obviously we had an actual baby in for the for
Right.
the intro shots and whatnot, before it went a bit nuts. But for us, yeah, we are big fans of practical effects as well. So we kind of went for animatronics with a little bit of a kind of CGI embellishment. I mean, it was one of those things where we didn't feel that modern audiences would necessarily appreciate the Rosemary's Baby angle,
Sure.
where you didn't see anything at all. I mean, I love Rosemary's Baby. It's probably one of my sort of top five horror movies, but times have changed, and we weren't too sure if we needed to show something as a payoff. Whether we went too far down that route, I'm not too sure, or whether it looks a bit mental, I'm not too sure. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I think if we had an extra 50,000, we could have done something really crazy with the baby. But I think what we've got is all right, and I suppose it plays into the era of filmmaking that we're trying to emulate as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, I mean, it works. It works well. I loved that we got to see as much as we did, because I thought for sure it was going to be a Rosemary's Baby thing where we just hear the sound effects and maybe like somebody reacting, but you don't actually get to see anything. But we get to see plenty here. Oh, with it. But yeah, I appreciate the practical effects, because I'd rather see less gory scenes, but with practical effects than an excessive amount of scenes with all CGI, because CGI blood still doesn't look right.
No, it's kind of something that they've never been able to perfect, and even the sort of the CGI squibs when someone gets shot, even in sort of $100 million Hollywood movies, they never really look quite right to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they had I was watching, well, this was a number of years ago, but when they released the movie American Sniper, there's an opening shot where they have our sniper on a mission and he shoots someone. And it was obviously, I mean, it's in the distance, but it was obviously CGI blood. It looked so, and like, this movie cost you like $50 million, and you couldn't even make that look right, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you've got an interesting atmosphere in this film as well, to where things slowly build up in tension and such, and more eerie. Even before the baby shows up, we feel that tension. What are the challenges to try to slowly build that tension so you don't immediately get to baby and get to the crazy stuff? You've got to build that. What kind of challenges does that pose to try to ease back the brakes a bit before you get to the good stuff?
I mean, I think that we had always kind of wanted to go down this sort of slow burn elevated horror route. I know it sort of borders on melodrama for the first half an hour, and I don't know if people are expecting the baby to show up immediately, but excuse me, we wanted to do a bit of scene setting with the characters and to build that up and feel that there was a sense that something wasn't quite right even before the baby arrived. Excuse me.
Sure.
Um, so we felt that that was important so that when the baby did arrive, then things kind of went on a bit of an upswing. Um, but I'd never done horror before, certainly not. I'd done thrillers before
Sure.
and whatnot, so I wasn't too sure how that was going to pan out. I watched a lot of kind of comparison or inspiration titles. And when I was shortlisting it, I'd kind of thought, what do they use in other films to build up the tension? Slow pushes in and whatnot on the scene. So, watching it, I think that you're super critical of your own work. So, if I were
Sure.
ever to do anything like this again, there's certain things that I think that, we could have improved on. But as a first sort of proper foray into the horror genre, I was pleased with the atmosphere and the tension that we built up. I mean, I can't take full credit for that. Obviously, I mean, like the sound mix and the score to me were
Oh
really
yeah.
really good in terms of
Mhm.
elevating that and adding to that tension. And I think that a good score and a good sound mix is at least 50%. Especially when it's trying to complement the visuals.
Especially in horror films. I mean, sound design is so important in
Yeah.
in horror films, or thrillers even, but especially horror. You've got to have that good sound design, and the music goes along with it, which, yeah, I did enjoy the score with it. I'm a big soundtrack junkie as well, so I like the score, a little bit more classical feel to the music on this. Did you have a composer in mind when you did this, or?
Yeah, I mean, I had worked with Chris before on an action movie that I did called Lock and Load, and something totally different. But Chris had always wanted to work on a horror, and he had some really good ideas on this in terms of emulating films from the sort of golden era of Hollywood. I think that he used a lot of old instrument
Mhm.
samples from back then for instruments that we don't really use anymore. And yeah, he'd really thought about it in a lot of detail. So I just left him to it, to be honest, to go and do what he wanted, because I trusted him completely in what he was going to come up with. So yeah, he had some sort of strings and orchestral sounding stuff in there as well. But yeah, I think that what he did was a really good fit for the film. So definitely think it helped to elevate it.
It really did. And I appreciate a good score. And yeah, I thought it stood out. I've seen some indie films where you don't have the budget, so they kind of cut back a bit on the music, and you're like, oh, I've heard this in three other movies. So you know,
Yeah.
because they got the same sample, which is fine because you're on a limited budget, but at the same time you recognize it. But it's funny you mentioned about your film and your own worst critic, because I was told once by a friend of mine who he's no longer in making film, but he always said you got to draw a line in the sand. Otherwise, your film will never release, right? Because you'll just keep going back to it and tweaking it. And eventually you just have to say, here, and there you go, and be happy with what you have. Is that what you kind of have to do for your approach? Otherwise, you might not always release it because you're always tweaking it.
Oh yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think that I always set myself a bit of a time limit to get the edit finished and whatnot. I suppose the thing about editing at this sort of level is compromise, and you go, okay, there's maybe half a dozen bits throughout the film that don't edit. We'll need to find a fix for those. Because reshoots are really expensive.
Right.
And it's getting the more that we do, the more that I go into the edit and go, this edits quite nicely. So I think obviously what you do on set helps as well.
Mm,
I mean, I'm not too precious about things. I do a film. I think that's the best that I can possibly get out of the footage that we've shot, and you kind of make peace with it and see it off out into the world. But even probably 6 months down the line, if I watched this again, there'd be more things that I would go, okay, I wouldn't do that now.
sure.
But it's all a learning curve, and it's all about taking it forward into the next film. And you're constantly learning. So I guess it's just about making peace with that process and not being too precious. I mean, you can be critical, but I think that if you're being critical to encourage self improvement, then that's fine.
Yeah, and that's good advice, and it's just, I mean, any creatives, I think we're all our own worst critic. Whatever you create, it's like you stare at it going, "Oh man, I really wish," but you see it because you've worked on it so closely, but other people from outside watch and go, "Oh, that was great," and you're like, "Okay, really?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Good. So what kind of things you said, since this was your kind of your first foray into horror, what kind of things were you able to bring from, like, say, the thrillers you've done in the past? Because there's always that gray line of people going, "Oh, is it horror? Is it thriller?" What kind of things were you able to bring from that to making your horror film?
I mean, I think that the thriller genre is quite broad. I mean, probably almost every film that's genre, if it's not comedy or whatever, has an element of thriller in it. So, I think that, shot framing and building up the tension in general, pacing's important as well. So, I know obviously this is a bit of a slow start, although we did have a kind of obscure opening sequence to this to try and draw people in. But I think that, it's important to pace a film. And I, I always think that thrillers are sometimes a bit more engaging than out and out horror.
Mhm.
Um, so I always find those slightly more interesting. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's just about taking the tropes from those kind of thriller films and trying to bring something a little bit new to them. I mean, um, I'm a bit of a Hitchcock fan as well,
Oh,
so there's
yes.
there's that kind of stuff in there. Yeah, and they probably don't really make movies like Vertigo and whatnot anymore, but there's some good stuff to draw on from there as well.
Yeah, a few years ago on our podcast, we did 8 episodes where we looked at 8 different Hitchcock films. One of them was Rope. And if you look at
Oh,
Rope, oh man, everybody thinks of, like, his classic ones like Psycho, which, don't get me, that's my one of my favorite all-time horror films, but you look at some of his other stuff and it's just like, man, you can see so many filmmakers who have borrowed from from him, because just a masterwork at making the most out of a little. But yeah, Rope was impressive. Uh,
yeah, no, that is a good movie. I would say that's probably in his top 10. Yeah, I mean, even shots that people are still trying to emulate now, he was quite. I think that obviously his films are of an era, but I think you have to appreciate how cutting edge and trend setting they were at the time in terms of the things that he was trying to do.
yeah, I mean, it's really impressive. Well, even Psycho to this day, if you watch Psycho, it holds up, and with how he tells that story is just one of those things where you're looking at it going, wow, you come out of it, it always struck a chord with me. The music, which is nothing but strings, your main character gets off halfway through the film, and you're like, wait, who am I supposed to follow now? And yeah, I think Hitchcock is really one of the greats, and that's a great person to study, I think, because a lot of the other big names, Spielberg and Luke, all of them, they've borrowed from Hitchcock in some way, shape, or form, for sure. And what's interesting is you mentioned Immaculate before. We've also seen two Exorcist films. One of them was really decent, or an Exorcist and an Omen film, and the Omen one was better. But we've seen seemingly an increase in religious horror again in trends in Hollywood in the last year or two. What would be your theory on possibly why we're seeing that? Because I know it ebbs and flows as far as trends, but it's surprising me the amount of religious horror we've been getting lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting what they did with the first Omen and the setting there. I mean, I know that the original had a bit of that religious aspect in it, especially in the finale. I mean, I thought the first Omen was really good. I think I
Yeah, I
probably
did
liked it.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I probably liked it better than most people. And it had a really, really nice tension and sense of dread in it. I mean, I think that location-wise, the religious stuff kind of works really well, even beyond trying to say anything morally or say anything about religion itself. It's always got the settings are always really good, and I think that they give way to some interesting stories and some interesting ideas, and the idea of religion kind of creates conflict even
Mhm.
internally. I mean, even movies like Benedetta, we had kind of taken some stuff from. So yeah, I mean, we didn't quite realize just how many religious movies were going to come out because at the time that we were
Sure.
starting ours,
Right.
we were like, this seems fairly original, and then this slew of religious movies came out. I guess it's one of those things, it might turn out to be a trend, just the
Hmm.
same as the slasher genre was seeing a bit of
Sure.
a comeback, just the same as the sort of ultra gore Terrifier type stuff has seen a comeback. I mean, you notice as well that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you had all the torture porn like Saw
Yeah.
and Hostel and stuff, and then that kind of phased out. So
Hmm.
I think it's probably like anything else. The horror genre seems to go through different phases.
And you were just see no, you're just trend setting. That's what it was when you were making this at the time. You're trend setting. See, that's all. Yeah, it's just always interesting to see the trends with horror, especially how everybody kind of jumps in. And how long did you have to shoot for this, and when did you first shoot this film or start shooting?
Well, we started in, I think it was September, October 2023. So we didn't want to stray too far into the winter because
Sure.
it makes it a lot more unpleasant. Although to be fair, the weather conditions when we did shoot were an absolute nightmare anyway. In Scotland, and I think that we wrapped in October and then went back and done some pickup stuff in November, literally because of the bad weather. So yeah, it was. I think we did about 20 days, and then it went to sale at the Cannes Film Market last year, and then that's it, just coming out now. So obviously, there's quite a long lead time for these things. You shoot something one year and you find yourself promoting it 18 months down the line. But I guess that's just how it works.
It's just the nature of filmmaking, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned Hitchcock and a few others. What kind of influences or did you take from, or what kind of which films influenced you for when you were coming up with the Baby in the Basket? You mentioned that you were kind of watching a number of films for ideas and such. What were kind of the biggest influences for you?
I mean, usually what I would do with Tom if we're kind of coming up with something or writing something is we'll go and watch a bunch of comparison titles. So I guess Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, a little bit of The Exorcist, Black Narcissus, and stuff where like the shot framing and whatnot, and the really sort of long one take shots. Benedetta was, I guess, a good
Mm,
reference. Don't Look Now as well. It's quite gothic. So I think that, probably visually all of those films, and then, tonally, I guess probably Rosemary's Baby's the sort of
sure,
main inspiration. I mean, sometimes I can't even explain how I've come up with things. It was just an idea
sure.
that kind of came to my head, and I thought, oh, that might be quite a cool idea. So yeah, but I mean, this the sort of late 60s, early 70s was a really strong period for horror. So I think that we took a lot of inspiration from that.
Well, especially European horror. I mean, it's during that time, even more so than what. There's a lot of really interesting and wild horror films from that period to where, that had to be an interesting time to make those films because you didn't really have a huge gauge or something to compare us to, right? So you're just kind of
Yeah.
winging it, going, okay, we're just going to do this.
Yeah, and I think the 70s was quite progressive in terms of film in general, not even just horror
Right.
films. I mean, you mentioned Psycho. I think people forget how prudish and restricted things were even back then and not liberal because apparently Psycho was the first movie to feature a toilet, like
Right.
a flushing toilet or something like that. But then obviously when you look at the stuff that's made in the 70s, you've got, the hard R movies, you've got really
Mhm.
gritty stuff like Dirty Harry. There's probably dozens of other ones that The Godfather, stuff that was the violence was kind of cranked up, and then the social commentary, even stuff like Taxi Driver and whatnot, wouldn't have been made in the 60s. So
Yeah.
I think that the 70s was probably the most progressive period in Hollywood in terms of that.
Yeah, and Taxi Driver, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, I consider Taxi Driver almost a horror film.
Yeah.
You watch that and the build up and everything that happens in that, you're like, this is kind of a horror film. You're watching almost, the makings of a crazy of a killer, of a serial killer. So, but yeah, so what's next for you, sir? You've got the Baby in the Basket, which you're promoting, which is out now into the world. Hopefully, it's getting well received because I think it deserves it. But what's next for you?
So I just had another film out in January as well called Dead Before They Wake, which it's a sort of crime thriller about sex trafficking rings. So it's kind of a bit like Taxi Driver meets You Were Never Really Here. So it's very,
Hmm.
very dark and quite grim. So I did that because I wanted to do something a bit more serious. So we had that out, and then Baby in the Basket, and then we're kind of looking at what we're going to do next. We're in the middle of scripting a suspense thriller, which is a bit like Hitchcock, but with some kind of more modern tropes in there as well. So that'll be quite a contained piece. Again, I think it was just an idea that sort of popped into my head one day, and Tom gets the dreaded WhatsApp voice note that starts with "I've got this great idea." So he knows he's got it's time to write another script. And then I think we might kind of move on to something a bit, kind of crazier and just purely for entertainment value. I mean, it's like Tom was saying the other day. He's like some of the reviews have talked about how well developed the characters are, and
Hmm.
everyone's got an arc and whatnot in the two films that we had out at the start of the year. But then you always want to kind of show a bit of range, so we might just do something for fun. A bit of a splatter fest that's just 90 minutes of entertainment. I think that's maybe where we'll go next year for whatever we do.
So you're open to revisiting horror. Did you enjoy making a horror film?
Yeah, 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 no, definitely. And I think that next time, we would probably do a bit of a 180 and do something
Sure.
else, either do a bit of a splatter fest or, I love folk horror as well.
Oh,
And,
folk horror, yeah. Did
which
you
is,
see? Oddity? Did you see Oddity at
no, I
all?
haven't seen that.
It's not. I don't know if it's quite a horror film, but it was a movie that came out last year. It should be out now, but I recommend it. It was one of my favorite horror films from last year. Didn't get a whole lot of play in the theaters here in the States, but Oddity ended up being probably my favorite. It's just this wonderful story of this woman who is blind, who has a twin, and her twin ends up dying under mysterious circumstances, and she ends up going to her sister's house to take care of things, and the sister's husband's there, and some odd things happen, and it just kind of builds up, and she's got this weird case that she doesn't want anybody to look in, and it's just, yeah, it's one of those things where it does remind me a bit of a folk horror for sure. I'm not sure if it is based on anything, but I just thought it was a very interesting story. But it's a quiet film. It's one of those where it's a slow burn, but it's very creepy. And so yeah, if you get a chance, I'd recommend Oddity. So, and to my listeners,
Yeah.
I would recommend The Baby in the Basket. I loved the title, and it's out now on streaming and that. And Nathan, where can they keep up with you and what you're doing? Do you have a social media link or something that they could follow?
Yeah, so we're on Facebook and Instagram under Shepka Productions, and we've also got a YouTube channel where we share all the trailers and some exclusive clips and stuff like that.
Awesome, awesome. And we'll put links to that for the body description of this podcast. And I thank you, Nathan. And yeah, everyone, check it out. And don't forget to always support independent cinema.